Welcome back to another episode of AMSC Ants Chats with me, Anthony Morrissey, the CEO and founder of AMSC. Well, I hope all is going well for you guys. It's January and recording this, and it's minus 14 here in Sweden. But the person I spoke to, the weather is quite nice where he is, so I'm sure I'm going to be talking to him more about that. Make sure you go and have a check out on my website, amsc.se. I've got loads of videos up there, loads of chats, loads of conversations, as well as some of my own insights into what you should do when it comes to hospitality and what to do if there's something goes wrong or what if there's something goes right. And also to prepare yourself properly going into next year. Anyway, you don't really want to talk to me, you want to talk to my guest and hear what he has to say on life. I found Bryce literally through a conversation that I had with different people about agents and what do agents do and what's the impact of agents within sport. Not just within rugby, we're right across the board within sport. So I contacted him and asked him would he come along, and I'm delighted that he was able to give me his time today to have a chat and listen to it. I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation about where player agencies work, but also from a branding perspective when you're thinking about players and how you look into it. But let's get him involved and let's have a conversation. Bryce, how you doing? Are you well?
Hey, Anthony, good on yourself.
Very good. I was just explaining there that I'm at minus 14. Explain to everybody, you referred to Durban as being maybe a little bit cold. What degrees is it in Durban right now?
It's about 26, 27 degrees Celsius. Anything below 25 is probably considered a bit of a chill. That's why that's when we might have to wear trousers.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I suppose a bit tough this time of year to be playing rugby. Previously it would be pre-season back in the old Super Rugby days, but now with URC, when it's icy in the UK and Ireland, and here you're looking at temperatures in the 30s for games.
It must be interesting for fans over in South Africa that you're watching now the URC and you're coming to see games and you're seeing the wind and rain that would be in Thomond Park in Limerick, for example, or other stadiums up in Glasgow or Edinburgh. From a fan perspective, before I get into everything else, what's your own take on the URC and the South African teams getting involved in the URC?
Look, I really enjoy it. I think it makes a lot more sense in terms of player welfare, travel-wise. The time zones were a huge issue when we were previously in Super Rugby. As great as it is to play against Australian and New Zealand sides, a lot of the time the games were 9 a.m. on a Friday morning, and you're either at work or pretending to work. Or on the other end of the spectrum, when you have a game that's catering to the South African audience, it's probably about 3 o'clock in the morning for the other fans in Australia or New Zealand. So it didn't really make sense. This makes a lot more sense to me. Obviously, being in the industry, you keep a close watch on Europe, on France, the UK, and Ireland as markets. So I think as agents, the club's a bit better than your average fan. Who has a day job and just supports their team on the weekend. But it's definitely growing on us. I think, a few rivalries emerging. You're starting to get a better grasp on how big, the Irish clubs are, how much better the Scottish clubs are than perhaps some fans thought here, and how it's not a competition that we're just going to steamroll. I think there was the assumption we just walk all over everyone because we're no longer playing the Crusaders in New Zealand anymore, and that's just not the case. So yeah, it's an eye opener. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, I must admit, as a Munster fan, I found it amazing to watch the final last year and to see the amount of people that turned up. And I think the South African teams have added so much, not just in their ability and their status as teams. And I love, for example, as a kid, I used to love the Stormers jersey. Just thought it was cool. Just thought the jersey looked really cool. And to be in Thomond Park and to see that jersey play against Munster in a competitive game was really, really cool. And I think everyone that's up on this side of the pond loves the fact that South African teams are there, because it does add that competitive value. It does add that extra dimension. And then traveling, I know Munster fans and Leinster fans and a lot of other teams fans have gone down to South Africa and really enjoyed their experience down there. And I think that's important as well for everything in growing the game. Anyway, just going back to yourself and your own love. I always say this when I start these conversations: is where did the love of sport come from you? So going right back to when you were a child, what's the earliest memory you can remember around sport?
My earliest memory was going to a then Natal, now the Sharks, against Springbok World Cup warm-up game prior to the 95 World Cup. Being a young kid in probably first, second grade, and seeing the amount of people there, pretty overwhelming. And then just how back then how parochial the support was. I assumed, we're going to go there to support the Springboks because we're South African. but back then, the thing with the province and what was Natal back then was it was seen as a very English team, a very English province, and a lot of our grandparents would tell us, if you're from Natal, you're not getting selected for a Springbok. So it was very much an us against them, mentality. And then a few months later, seeing the 95 World Cup, everything that I trace, in my memory is relative to the 95 World Cup. It was overwhelming. And I think my love for sport probably kicked off there, to see the impact it can have on people, that amount of people, 50,000 people or 60,000 people in one stadium, all, backing the same horse essentially was something beautiful to see. And I think today it's quite rare to have so many people moving in the same direction, I suppose.
Yeah, I loved the conversation about Natal because it just brought back memories of being a Munster fan as a child, because we thought the exact same thing. We were brought up to think that you played for Munster means you won't play for Ireland. So I'm on board with that completely. It's where the bitterness in Thomond Park comes from, if I'm completely honest, and I love that. The 95 World Cup for me was also a massive memory of mine from a watching perspective and from the outside looking in. It must have been pretty sensational to be in South Africa at that time with everything that happened around that World Cup. But also, and people forget this, that New Zealand team was pretty damn good. So for South Africa to win that in South Africa with everything that came with that against that team, with the likes of John Olomu in it and people like that just adds to the whole experience, I can imagine. So from that perspective, then, when you went on, as you were going on within your childhood and you started going through sport, was it rugby you were playing, or was it just any sport you could find, or was rugby the one thing that kind of connected you to yourself or your friends group?
Any sport I could find, really. I mean, my family's more of a cricket family anyway. Wasn't the biggest kid, and I think when you see on social media the clips from like British and Irish social media channels talking about the size of some of the South African players. Well, we're not all that size, but we did play against guys that size at school. So, for me, I had no. I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, I dreamt of becoming a professional, and it just didn't happen." So I got involved, on the business side of things. I never really had aspirations or any thoughts of getting that far or being that good. I really just enjoyed playing as many sports as possible, socializing with friends, and actually the off the field always intrigued me more than the game. So the build up, the media, the pre-match, wondering, if what sort of contracts have been negotiated, etc.
Yeah, and I find that interesting as well, because that would be a lot of my own friends group that's changed just the mentality of how people look at sport and look at the kind of business part. Moving into becoming an agent and getting involved in that, where was the first stream of that? You kind of said there a second ago that you felt very interested in the business side of things and you felt interested in how contracts were done. Was there one moment where you kind of fell into it, or is it something that you were in university or in school and you went, you know what, I can see I'd love to be more involved in that side of the sports game?
Yeah, so I mean, I always wanted to get involved and had no real idea where to start. South Africa is quite a small market in most industries, and quite there's a perception that the entry point is quite difficult. So the advice that I got from a young age from a math teacher, actually, who was a very good marathon runner. I think he ran like Olympic qualifying times. And he said to me, firstly, don't study-wise put all your eggs in the sports basket. Don't think you necessarily have to study sports management. Study something adjacent, like a commerce or legal degree. So I studied law at university, which interested me anyway, with the idea of I'll use it to try and get into the industry, and then just trying to take whatever gap I could to be involved in sports somehow. So it started out as writing a bit of content, free of charge for a school sports website. That website would have a print magazine now and then in local sports stores. Coaching young kids in primary school, cricket, rugby, just trying to be involved wherever I could. And even those the early writing work free of charge caught some attention of some people. I was asked if I would scout for Western Province, the Rugby Institute on this side of the world, basically just fill them in whenever there's a rough diamond that hasn't been picked up by the system, which didn't make me that popular with the Sharks at the time. Being based in Durban, they didn't really like me going around local schools and trying to find gems for Western Province, but it was a point of entry for me. And I was serious about it, but knew I wasn't going to necessarily be paid a salary when I'm not really in the industry yet. So I transferred my degree to night school. I finished my law degree at night school so that I could do internships where I could, paid, unpaid. And the first real gig I got was with an athletics and rugby agency that was it represented quite a few Springboks back in the day, but at this stage was quite focused on individual athletes. And I was tasked really with building up the rugby division again, by having a scouting focus on young players, and particularly players with British, Irish, European heritage, who's got access to a passport
Yep.
or perhaps an ancestral visa, because rugby especially was very much an export market there. It was, find the player, sign the player, sell the player to a British club.
Yep. And from that perspective, you kind of said that you were doing your law degree and you always wanted sport was always the point. I love your maths teacher's comment, by the way. I totally agree with it. I don't know anybody who I've worked at Munster. I worked at Munster for 11 years. I don't know anyone who went through that sports stuff that's not directly connected to the team, that's in the business side. Everyone else did exactly what you just did, whether it's a law degree, a commerce degree, whatever that may look like. But was sport always, just want to underline that the sport was always your main focus that you want to get involved with because of that love? And you said a very interesting point at the start, that it went back to 95 in that moment. But what I loved about that comment was you never actually mentioned about the try or the players. It was that moment and that connection and that feeling. Is that still what sport gives to you, that connection and that feeling, part of something bigger than just a 9-to-5 job, with all due respect to a 9-to-5 job?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, look, if you want a 9-to-5, sports not the industry for you, even if you're working for a club or a franchise, it's a lot of weekend work, it's a lot of after hours work. As an agent, there is no real off time there. If a player or a club phone you on a Sunday evening, you take the call. You don't have to, but if you want to be successful, you do. It's a relationship business. Look, in terms of, does it still give me that love? I see it from a different perspective. Obviously, when you're in the industry, you see the good and the bad. You see many sides to people, and to the athletes themselves. But it's less of a juvenile love, I'll say, of a young child, and more of a case of dealing with personalities and having a close relationship to them. So if I've got a client, you see them as like a younger brother who you try and nurture. So just like a screaming parent or sibling on the sideline. I keep my thoughts to myself, but on the inside, you're still backing them as much as you would a family member.
And are you able to do that? And what I mean by that is, are you able to have South Africa won the World Cup this year? So are you able to be Bryce, the South African fan who can have a couple of beers with his mates or spend time with his family and watch the game and get really excited, and then separate that to your job where it's like, okay, I now need to make sure that my client X is looking at trying to get into France or England or Ireland because they may not get into the Springbok team, and I need to start thinking about what that looks like. Are you able to separate that, as in compartmentalize that and go, at one point in my weekend, I'm stop working really. I'm just going to enjoy my time watching the sport I love?
Only at international level. So I mean, at test match level, I can be fully South African and be a Springbok supporter. At a club level, as you know, and I mean, my brother was in town the other day. He lives in the States and he came to visit. And like many expats, you know, he's really passionate. And my brother-in-law, who's in Glasgow as well, they're passionate, you know, Sharks fans, having grown up here. And I think they get a bit irritated when I'm not as passionate as them.
Yep.
Because really I want our clients to do well.
Yep.
And the result is pretty much secondary for me. You know, if the Stormers are playing Munster and, you know, the Stormers don't necessarily win, but Hachiva Daimani, one of our clients, is man of the match or has a great match, you know, it's not going to leave me feeling despondent after the game. You know, I'm happy that our players are doing well. They're injury free. And on the other side, you know, if there are injuries, let's say on the other side, and perhaps an unfortunate long-term injury, you know, my immediate thoughts is, you know, firstly, obviously you hope the guy's okay, but then the second thought is, you know, will that team need an immediate solution, and can we provide one?
Yeah, and that's a really honest and lovely answer, if I'm completely honest. The whole thing I like about it is the process you went through earlier in your career, where you started off coaching, in essence, of primary school kids, but also scouting, a lot of those things. Nowadays, when it comes to going after agents or going after players or looking at players or review, is that still a massive part of your role, to scout players to see who are the next up and coming ones? And if so, what roughly, when does that whole process start, or what does that process look like?
So previously, in years past, I had an age group focus. That was my mandate at previous agencies I'd worked at. Now less so. You know, the younger you go, the less likely that player is to be a guaranteed star. It's, you know, it's like any sport. An academy star is not necessarily going to be an international. And I think there was a stat of, you know, the Springbok World Cup winning team, I think a third of them didn't even play, you know, Craven Week, which is our, you know, premier age group provincial scouting opportunity. So another third didn't play South African under 18. So, you know, there's a sea of names of players who were schoolboy superstars who don't necessarily come through. That said, certain players you can just tell are special and are men amongst boys, even if they're not on the physical side of it. Sometimes they just have, technically they're far superior to other players, far more mature. You know, I remember going to an Easter sports festival here and sitting next to I think it was Sam Cordingley, who's now at the Queensland Reds, and they were just in town, so he was passing time, and he saw about 5 minutes of Warwick Galant, who's, you know, the Stormers fullback, and he just said, yeah, that guy will play pro, you know, one day. So when you've got the eye, you can see that certain players like that. So to answer your question, I would probably look at a player. Start monitoring a player who's special, who's the top 1%, probably around the age of 18. But increasingly, I would prefer to look at a player who's in the age group provincial ranks here. So an under 19 Currie Cup, under 21 Currie Cup, who's quite special, or you know, our university system, our varsity cup here is massive, and is probably the biggest pipeline for professional players now. So I like to look at a player who's about to graduate. I'd like to ideally sign them then and say, look, let's finish your course, finish your degree or diploma, whatever qualification it is. Once you're done, I can market you as hard as I can, knowing that if it doesn't work out, you've still got the qualification behind you. Generally, guys then are 22, 23 physically, they're ready to make that step up. And also if I'm signing a guy at 22, 23, I haven't necessarily invested 4 to 5 years in a player of potentially no investment. He might not come through. Even if he is contracted, he'll be on a small contract. So it's a lot of time, a lot of hours. That as an agent, we aren't necessarily, seeing any agent's fees or commissions because he's just not at that point yet. Having said that, a good player, you want to pick him up as early as possible and form that relationship. Because as much as players can jump from agent to agent and agency to agency, the good ones tend to stick around with the agents for the better part of their career, and you want to be that guy as soon as possible.
And from then relationship perspective, is there relationships then you need to make with the clubs in Ireland and Scotland and England and in Wales and France? And you mentioned earlier on that you kind of keep an eye on what's going on their own patch. So let's say club A is missing a 10 or a 50, a guy who plays 10, 15, and then the guy that's coming to replace on those two positions gets injured. Is that a conversation that you're going to contact them to let them aware of it? Or is it just one of those ones where you're keeping an eye knowing that there may be a call coming for one of your guys?
Depends on the territory. So, for us as agents in South Africa, doing business in Scotland, for example, we could chat to the clubs. In the UK and Ireland, they've got an accreditation system, so you generally need to work through a partner on that side of the pond. And France especially, France is quite stringent.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, look, that's more negotiation and getting to that point.
Yep.
Having a relationship with a club who's possibly in town because it's a URC game, in Durban or Cape Town, or a Champions Cup or Challenge Cup. You can form a relationship there, and then really it's about understanding not only different clubs but what different countries are looking for. So,
okay,
obviously Ireland have quite a stringent system of how many non-Irish qualified players they'll allow in. So you've got to understand that for the 4 Irish provinces, maybe you can look to send a gem there if they're young enough. And a few South African schoolboys have gone over and gone into the academy system and done quite well, particularly if they have Irish parents or grandparents. But really, Irish clubs are at the point now where they want Springboks and they want Springbok stars. Because the mindset is if we have a non-Irish qualified player and he's taking up a valuable spot, he better be world class for us to make that investment. So it's team dependent and understanding the dynamics of those particular countries and how centralized their contracting is and how much say their national body has.
And one last one on that before I move on to the next topic. The whole thing around bringing a player up and getting that whole process involved, does it also, you also take in mind when you're thinking about a player and you're seeing this special talent and you're seeing this guy has got a lot involved in it? You mentioned earlier on about maturity. Is that a massive part as well? Because the fear, I'm assuming, in any walk of life is that you leave your family, your friends in South Africa and move to England, and this isn't just about rugby, this is about life, and moving to England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and having to go into that culture. As an agent, are you always aware of that personality that would be going up there to see if they're a right fit for the club, as well as, you know what, we get our player in here, you're going to be able to do really well, he's got an opportunity to play, etc. Is there the mindset of the person also involved in this?
It should be. So a good agent will understand that. I mean, I can think of a case now of a player that we were involved with the player or the deal. A South African player that went to an English club that has a reputation of being a real old school club. You know, they enjoy a beer, to say the least. You know, that's the squad dynamic. You know, they work hard and they play hard.
Yep.
And this player was a great player for their style of play, but he was you know, he had a strong faith and he was a teetotaler. So that was never going to work, and it didn't work.
Yep.
So, you know, that sort of thing you need to keep in mind, because as an agent, that's going to naturally affect your reputation with the club as well. Not only will the player want to leave, and then you're scrambling to try and find another solution for him, probably mid-season, but the club's going to have that negative perception of you as you essentially sold them a dud,
yep.
in terms of the deal. So even more than that, you know, from a South African standpoint, South African players come from an array of different cultural backgrounds.
Yep.
So generally what we find is that when foreign clubs want players, particularly younger players, that they don't know much about, they want what they don't have or what they perceive South Africa to have, and that's size. So they want the boys who are, you know, monsters, over 2 meters tall, which is all good and well, but often those boys are, you know, from farms or from rural areas, and they've never left home. Potentially, you know, they're not fluent or comfortable in English, and now you're putting them in a whole new situation on the other side of the world where they have no support system. It's probably not going to work. Whereas if, you know, another guy who's probably, you know, maybe grown up Durban, Johannesburg, Cape Town, more cosmopolitan, is probably, you know, fluent and comfortable in English, and wants to travel and experience something new. Maybe he's not the size profile you're looking for, but there's a good chance he's going to want to stay there for 10 years and be a good club man.
Yeah, I straight away think of someone like a Jan Klein, if I'm completely honest. The scenario within the future, then going into sports agency and being agents, I know a lot has been made around the commercial side for every single company and how people watch sport anymore and where the connection is. And then obviously with the pandemic that was involved, the changes that created. Where do you see the agency or the role of the sport agent or player agent going in the next 4 or 5 years?
Yes, so I mean, primarily our role is still to negotiate contracts, playing contracts, and to find playing opportunities for clients, and constantly be looking for those. I think rugby is, to a certain extent, still quite a conservative sport, so there are fewer characters, or fewer players allowed to be characters.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I mentioned Hachiva Daimani earlier, but then I think of like the Joe Marlers as well. You know, in other sports, possibly in football or in American sports, you know, those type of characters are loved even by fans of other teams, because they're such personalities, and commercially that makes them very valuable, you know, to brands. And if we can, you know, somehow keep the ethos of the game whilst allowing guys to be individuals that make themselves more marketable, then from you know, my standpoint, my day won't be split 80%, you know, playing opportunities, and then seeing what commercial opportunities there are, you know, as a cherry on top for a player who isn't a World Cup winner, but still has a personal brand that corporates want to align themselves with.
Yeah, I think Joe Myler is a very good example, and you can look at a lot of people in the States. I think everyone looks at American sports and sees a lot of the changes that are coming into both South African and the rest of the world sports. One last thing I'm going to get into, Val, is what I call my top 10, which is 10 quick-fire questions. Some aren't quick-fire. I used to call them quick-fire. I used to get given out for that. 10 quick questions. There's nothing in there to catch you out. I'm not going to ask you any personal things other than quick-fire information. Right. Ready to go?
Yep.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Netflix or the cinema?
I've got a 1-year-old baby now, so Netflix.
Great answer. Great. I've got a 1-year-old who is obsessed with Paddington Bear, so that if she's ever screaming and crying, I just flick on Paddington Bear and it calms her down instantly. Best stadium you've ever been into?
Oh, look, I think the F&B Stadium in Johannesburg is pretty awe-inspiring. A stadium that size. Stamford Bridge was pretty great, as just something different. But I'll go with F&B Stadium in Soweto.
In Sweden, we have a thing called fika. And fika is where at 3 o'clock every day, everybody gathers around for coffee, whether you're working or whether you're around with family and friends. It's just like 15 minutes where you can chat. They call it fika. So, fika or go to the pub?
The pub visits are few and far between. I would say pub because they're so rare these days.
With a 1-year-old, I totally get you, my man. Totally get you. And I have a 4-year-old above that who forgets that he has a 1-year-old. So I fully get it. What's your favorite dinner? If I offer you any dinner in the world, what's your favorite one right now?
I like a good curry.
What kind of curry? What type? Any type in particular?
Probably a mutton curry.
Oh, lovely. Oh, great call. Favorite movie?
So I'm not gonna go Jerry Maguire because that's so stereotypical. I really enjoyed. I think Any Given Sunday was a really
yes,
impressive movie.
Yes, that's a very good shout.
Not for the kids, but really good from the lesser known sides of the game.
100%. The favorite jersey you either have or seen or wish you had?
Strictly rugby.
Can be anything. Any sport.
I've actually got an old Swedish jersey, Swedish football jersey. Yeah. But I will say that my brother-in-law in Glasgow recently sent over matching Glasgow Rangers jersey for myself and my 1-year-old. So I love that. I thought that was really cool.
That is pretty class. I know a friend of mine sent over, and I'd be from Cork in Ireland, and there's a friend of mine who consistently sends me over Clare stuff, which would be a competitor team, to put on my children. Consistent. Yeah. It's just since my son was 4, it's all the time he sends it over. So I fully get it. Last one, which I always ask everybody: if you could define sport and what it means to you, what definition would you give to
it? Look, for me, sports is probably the last segment of life that can be trusted. Everything is your perspective, your angle on things. Every person looks at a situation with bias, and how does it affect me? Whereas sports is 100% the result is the result. Also, I think sports in a time where we're community. There are so few instances where people come together as a community. We're always on our phones, or we're like you said, streaming rather than going to cinema. Sports and even fewer and fewer people are go to church on a Sunday. To come together as a community. I think sports probably the last segment of society that's standing, in my opinion. So sport is community.
That's the best answer I have got to that question in the 35 episodes I've done. Genuinely, it's a fantastic answer. Absolutely brilliant. Bryce, thank you so much for jumping on time. I'm so jealous of your weather. I'm so jealous of everything that goes on in South Africa. As I said to you before I came on, I used to live with a couple of South Africans in London and had the mistake of not understanding what a braai was. So I must make myself over to South. They also were Shark fans living based out of Durban. And I remember their absolute obsession with cricket, which was where, coming from Ireland, we had no idea what cricket was. And I learned so much about cricket from their whole experience and all their information it is. So thank you so much for your time. I really, really do. Really, really thank you so much for jumping on.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks, Anthony.
Now, that was brilliant. I said it every single time when you hear my podcast and come to the end of it. But if you didn't get the last answer to the question, rewind it, because that's a brilliant answer. And I meant what I said. It's the best answer I've heard on what it means to the definition of sport, because sport means more than that. Also, across the whole interview that Bryce talked about, he mentioned one thing I really liked, where his maths teacher, when he was in school, told him not to necessarily fully concentrate on sport, and instead to look at getting your law degree or your commerce degree and start evolving out of that. And then speaking about how he has to then almost park his love for the team that he had when he was a child when it comes to the Sharks, and instead looking at his clients as if they were his little brothers or little kids. And that's a really interesting one. Why? Because a lot of people look at sports agents and think it's all about money and it's all about generating income and commissions, all that kind of stuff. Of course, people have to live, but also there's a long-term relationship part, which came right through in that conversation. I thought it was brilliant. I really, really do. That was a really interesting one. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Make sure you jump onto some of my website stuff to find out all the other bits and pieces that I'm doing. Also, from clubs and federations, if you're involved in a club and federation and want to learn how I can help you at AMSC and help grow your brand and help grow your club and federation to what it should be without spending loads and loads of money, give me a shout. And my email address is at the bottom of all these stuff. Anyway, I'll let you go. My music's going to kick me out. Thanks so much for everything. Look after yourselves. Take care.